So maybe I should just start to again welcome everyone to this symposium. This is part of a tradition of symposia taking place between Webster University Geneva and the University of Bergen. And in particular, the two centers that are twinned, the Webster Center for Creativity and Innovation and SLATE, the Center for the Science of Learning and Technology, represented today by Ingunn. And together, Ingunn, Constance, and I, we co-organized three years ago an in-person meeting in Geneva. Now we have to clarify how it was. And we had the theme, we had the theme creativity, learning, and technology. And every year after, except of course this December actually, we met in person in a different location. So we had Geneva first, then we went to Bergen. We came back to Geneva. We're supposed to go back to Bergen, but we meet online, and hopefully we will go back to Bergen in December next year. So what is this symposium about? Some of you might recognize the little wooden cubic type of character. So this was our logo for the first meeting, the one that as I mentioned, was on creativity, learning, and technology. After that, we focused on interdisciplinarity in Bergen. And then we focused on the relation between the importance of creativity innovation in different spheres of education, work, society. So what came out after 3 years? Some of you might know that. Those who don't, by the way, you can get in touch with either myself or the other presenters. But the presentations we gave at the time, 3 years ago, were collected within a special issue of the Creativity Research Journal, which is one of the leading journals in our field of creativity research. And we had even a more pleasant surprise when Routledge approached us a few months ago, and they wanted to turn this special issue into a book. So this book came out as well, and it's called Creative Learning in Digital and Virtual Environments, Opportunities and Challenges of Technology-Enabled Learning and Creativity. And I have my copy here. Hope at least some of the authors, contributors receive their copy. This book gathers the different papers in the special issue, but it also adds a final chapter where the contributors have a dialogue about what does it mean to be teaching and learning online at the moment, what are the challenges and opportunities. So if any of these sounds of interest, do check the special issue, do check the book, and of course get in touch with us, and I'm sure we'll be happy to share with you the presentations or the research presented there. Now, let's think about today. Today we have, initially I said 2 hours, but I was wrong. We have 2 hours and a half because we have a lot of things to talk about. Today's symposium is basically a bit of an update or a 3 years on, what are we doing now kind of event. We're going to start. So we've gathered most of the people who presented, but not everyone who presented in the first symposium. And we have a bit of a tight schedule, but it's good because we're going to hear many topics, for 15 minutes. And then we have about 5 minutes for questions and answers. We're going to start with Ingunn, representing Bergen and SLATE, talking about leading for innovation, how crisis can be innovation catalyzers. Then we're going to continue with Todd from University of Paris, Todd Lubart, playing the creativity game, Educating Humans and Robots. We're going to go on with Kronis, University of Athens, Creativity in Education, Learning Computational Thinking through Game Modding. Maciej will talk to us from Poland about what drives what on the dynamics of creativity achievement links. And then I will present on behalf of myself and Constance some of the research we've been doing on creativity and learning on social media, and especially around the pandemic. And finally, last but definitely not least, Giovanni will remind us that we're celebrating 150 years of Maria Montessori. So we're going to talk about creativity and learning in 2020 and potentially beyond, especially with the final discussion moderated by my colleague Claude Chaudet from Webster University Geneva. So we have a good, and I see people keep coming, so we're at almost 40. Welcome everyone. We have a good set of presentations, hopefully a lot of food for thought. And I think we're a minute ahead, but that's not actually bad. So maybe I'm just gonna give the floor, the online floor, to Ingunn to share her slides. unless you plan to do some other format, Ingunn.
No, I can try.
Dan.
I can try to share. Do you have to stop sharing first?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. Maybe that's.
How do I exit? Sorry, you can see that technology is maybe not my strong point, but here we are.
Okay, I'll try. And I'll even do this. And can you see?
Yeah, perfect.
Perfect. I'll just time myself so I don't start and never stop.
Time you too.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Vlad. And it's really good to see you in this format, but still again. My talk today is about creativity, but it's even more about innovation. It's about leading for innovation and how crises can be seen as innovation catalysts. So this is my agenda. Start with innovation, look at this term. There are different barriers and drivers. And I will present some results from our research from two contexts where I have been interviewing leaders in industry and also in academia about how do crises affect organizations' ability to innovate. And I will look at experiences and lessons learned from leaders of industry and academia. And then I will go to look at innovation through management, strategy, organization, and culture. Innovation can be defined as the creation, development, and also implementation of a new product, process, service with the aim of improving efficiency, effectiveness, or a competitive advantage. And innovation, it is about changing practices, and creativity is very important for innovation. As you all know, in creativity research, we divide between the little c and the big C. The little c is about personal. We are creating personal new knowledge. It's about possibility thinking. It certainly involves the question, what if? The big C, on the other hand, now we are into the innovation and that we are creating knowledge that are implemented at society level. And some people refer to this as the elite definition of creativity. We can agree or disagree, but it's reserved for the people who come up with something that really makes a difference in the world. But the thing is that we need the little c, we need the creative processes in order to develop big C. So every innovation has creative aspects. There are, of course, many barriers to innovation. For instance, if the organization is large, it's complex, there might be challenges in the communication across levels, but also between different disciplines. It's about heritage and legacy. What has worked in the past is seen as good practice, so why fix it if it's not broken? Also, it's about lacking capacity for organizational learning. We can be lacking structures and dialogue between professional groupings. And also, we might have technological barriers, like we are lacking the suitable technology and capacity, and this together can hinder to execute changes in the organization. Of course, also drivers. The most, I suppose, common is about the unexpected, incongruities, process needs, changes, market structures. And of course, today, we all have heard about COVID-19. And also in 2014, we had the oil crisis in Norway. Both of these crises can be called what we refer to as burning platforms. We need to act now. There is an immediate need. So in this way, they can be catalyzers for innovation. The project that I will present some results from is called Leading Creative Knowledge Processes, and it's about knowledge-intensive organizations and learning contexts. And the questions guiding this presentation is, how do crises affect organizations' ability to innovate? And I'm looking into experiences and lessons learned from leaders of two different contexts, industry and academia. It's qualitative, semi-structured interviews in these two contexts. I've interviewed 12 leaders in industry and also 9 leaders in academia. And I have to say that these leaders in academia, this study is part of a SLATE project, which is called It Takes a Community. And this project is about the digital transformation of UIB with Barbara Wasson, director of SLATE. She is the project leader. And the part that I'm working on, organization, leadership, and innovation, this is where I work with my colleague, Kristin Børte at SLATE. So we have interviewed these leaders in academia. So these are quite different contexts, but there are similarities in how the leaders experience and what lessons they learned. Some of the lessons learned were connected to change management. Others were connected to innovation and technology, and some were connected to sharing experiences and to creativity. Change management. This is where the leaders really expressed the need to have clear communication from top down and to be hands-on where the development work happens in order to be aware of challenges, but also different opportunities. One of the academic leaders said, "We have seen new ways of working. I think that an important part of change management is to be hands-on where the development work happens, to be aware of the challenges and to spot the opportunities in order to solve the challenges and to keep up the speed in the development work." So we see they're also referring to the speed. According to research, innovation requires strategical thinking, and it includes both top-down and the more explorative entrepreneur approaches, the typical bottom-up. Organizations that are successful in change management, they have some characteristics. They have routines, how to spread the knowledge in the organizations, how to make tacit knowledge explicit. They also have a culture with trust and that people caring about each other at different parts of the organization. They have a strategy that is about communication and how to empower their employees. When it comes to lessons learned on innovation and technology, it was very clear that the organizations learned very fast how to use new digital tools. And this sort of gave some more self-belief and how they could cope, how the organization's ability to manage change was. Technology offers new opportunities, both in organization development and at the individual level. So we see that employees in both sectors see new ways of managing their task, and this is what we often refer to as employee-driven innovation. One of the academic leaders said, "I think that due to how we were forced to move teaching and learning practices forward in the last weeks, there is the potential to strengthen us in the future." If you look at research, technology and digital tools are indeed valuable in supporting innovation in a knowledge-intensive and high technological society. But, and there is a but, this technology must be seen as part of the process of human relations and interaction, which is the key to share, transfer, and develop new knowledge. Technology is not that interesting just on its own. New technology requires digital leadership. This leadership connects the leaders with the technology. And of course, this sort of digital leadership is not only of how to use technology, but also very much a strategic view and how to make this culture focus on engagement and achievement. The last lesson learned I will present today is about sharing experience and creativity. Sharing experiences across disciplinary boundaries, but also organizational levels, was looked at as very important. It was in fact crucial. There was a need to create arenas for interaction, and this could also stimulate creativity. One of the academic leaders said, "I believe in creating new arenas for interaction and sharing experiences and learning from each other." And in industry, one of the leaders said, "It is crucial for people to meet other views in order to be creative. Interdisciplinary teamwork should not be underestimated." And if you look at some research, interdisciplinary collaboration, it's very time consuming and it's also very challenging. People have difficulties in understanding each other. They may be using different terminology, etc. So there is barriers to that. And to succeed, we have found some underlying conditions. At the individual level, it's important that team members have some kind of openness, curiosity, and respect towards each other, but also in the context to have trust and to have psychological safety. Because when we are moving out of the comfort zone, if we are just trying to leave this box and be creative, we have to feel safe in order to, to ask the silly questions. Several perspectives stimulate creativity and learning, and this might lead to innovation. So when we are looking at the oil crisis in 2014 and now COVID-19, they are indeed innovation catalysts, but what happens after? How can we continue to innovate the organization when daily life is back? There are some challenges. How can we continue creative exploration and learning when the crisis is over? How to continue innovating in the same speed? Should we in the same speed? How to establish structures for knowledge sharing, and how to deal with innovation barriers. What is next? I believe that innovation management might be a good term. Innovation through management, strategy, organization, and culture. It's important to create an awareness on different learning strategies for the whole organization. This needs to be anchored in an understanding of the organization as one entity. And we also had to pay attention to the interplay, to the relation between the different levels and structures. And also the organization needs to be looked at in interplay with the external surroundings. We need to pay attention to how we can exploit the external innovation drivers, for instance, new technology, but also the changes in society. And of course, we need a strategy with focus on development and infrastructure. Also, we need to have well-functional technology that is actually used in our organization, and that the measures taken are really communicated out to the whole organization. So we need to establish a culture for creativity. Remember the little c, how important that is for the big C. We need exploration, we need knowledge sharing, and we need this to happen through arenas for interdisciplinary and cross-level collaboration. Innovation management is about opening up for this sort of creative development, but it is also about exploiting existing resources. This is what we often refer to as ambidextrous leadership. I will show you a model. I tend to make models, and this shows innovation management in a process perspective. So we see that this model has the process perspective, and it includes both top-down and bottom-up approaches. We also see an ambidextrous leadership style, which is about creative development of new processes and exploiting existing knowledge in the organization. Innovation can be achieved through interaction between these different levels that we see: management, strategy, organization, and culture. And as we know, the organization is influenced by different innovation drivers, like new situations and new technology. So in a top-down perspective, the management will focus on developing new strategies, which again can influence the organization through new measures, which again can lead to new practices and new experiences. And then if we look at the more bottom-up perspective, which is typically employee-driven, new practices will be developed through sharing experiences across disciplines and levels, which again can stimulate creativity and organizational learning, which again will give new insight, new understanding that also, of course, will influence the strategy and management level. And in this way, the organization might achieve what we can call a self-reinforcing innovation culture. But, of course, it is important for every innovation leader to have knowledge about innovation drivers, opportunities, and challenges in digital learning. So this is why I want to show this book that we have already talked about, because this is about creative learning in digital and virtual environments, opportunities and challenges of technology-enabled learning and creativity. And I think that this book might be of interest to a lot of different people, also organizations. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ingunn. I always love to see your new models. And you offered us one now. Excellent. So we have you've been perfect with time. You even have half a minute extra of the 5 minutes we planned for a few quick questions, a couple of quick questions. If anyone has, you can also write them in the chat. I'm monitoring the chat as well. But who would like to ask Ingunn something? Otherwise, I will ask her something.
You can just say, "Oh, this is excellent."
Yeah, no, that was the that's the answer actually.
That option, no, I'm kidding.
Anyone? Well, I'm curious, Ingunn. I mean, I love this idea and how you showed us the organization and all these different components and how they go bottom up and top down, all these processes. I was just, thinking through, because you do a lot of work with groups and organizations, and you kind of move in between the individual and the organizational. And I think it would be useful, I know some students are connecting as well, to think about what would be the best methods to get data about both individual level processes, group, or actually not both because there are many, group level processes and organization, right? How is it the same data set that you use to get information about all three? Do you use specific data sets, or would you like to? This is not only what you do, but what you envision you could do. So yeah, methodologically, how study all of this complexity? Do we need different types of data?
Yeah, in the study on the digital transformation of UIB, we are having surveys going out to the employees and to the students to see how this digital transformation really affected them. So that is a really large project. In the other projects, I have been interviewing people at different levels, like the CEOs and then employees, and so trying to follow the organization from bottom to the top. Right. It needs to be said that it's very difficult to get access to the top leaders. They will show up with communication people and also legal. So it's like you have a group conversation. It's so that is quite difficult to really get to hear what the CEO is really thinking, and yeah. But it's right. It's an interesting landscape to look at, and I see that creativity, that it's so close, it's so important for innovation. I mean, it's yeah.
So you would approach the leaders as one point of contact, right, between the different levels, individual and strategy, everything you told us. Yeah, excellent. Anyone else? Any questions for Ingunn? Don't be shy. We also have a discussion at the end, and we can leave some emerging themes maybe for Claude and the rest to talk about.
In fact, if I can just make a comment then, because everyone is talking about how the urgency to innovate and we have to continue. Mm-hmm. But I think also it's important to reflect, do we need to continue innovation in the exact speed? It's right. That, but then you move into some other, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting comment. How at least the organization you work on, which is your university, do you feel like there is a constant kind of ethos to just innovate? Is it for the sake of innovation or for the sake of changing, or how do they see it? Is it how is innovation always moving forward? Or
yeah, it's interesting because I started to look in more of the oil industry since that was in 2014, and now when I was going in to look at the University of Bergen, I see that the leaders are starting to have a lot of the same terminology as the more industry leaders. Right. Because of this, now we have to act, we have to innovate, we have to change, and suddenly creativity is a word that we are allowed to use. I felt that in many years it was like creativity, that we don't do that. You know, we are serious people. It's you know, it's kind of a misunderstanding. But now creativity seems to be one of the really important concepts, and at the University of Bergen, it's so much easier now to you know, to be noticed when you say that, oh, I'm a researcher, I'm a creativity researcher. So, oh.
Right. Well, it's the proof of it is that we're doing this series of symposia for 3 years now, and we keep on doing them also with support from the university. Excellent. Thank you so much, Ingunn. So a round of electronic applause. Let me see, where is it? Actually, Todd taught me that. Todd, who's going to follow you. Todd, can you share your screen? Do you have a PowerPoint to share?
Yeah.
So playing the creativity game. That's what Todd Lobart, University of Paris, will tell us about, educating humans and robots. Here we go.
Okay. You see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So thank you to Vlad and Ingunn and Constance, the organizers, for this opportunity. This is a bit of a conceptual talk, and I'd like to explore the idea of educating humans and robots to be creative. So, as you know, when you talk about creativity, you have the act of creation, and you have the idea of some kind of inspiration, perhaps divine. And so it seems natural these days to pass on this idea of creativity to the next species that might be sharing Earth with us, the robots. So first I'd like to say robots can help people create. Here's an example of a child, and the robot is prompting the child with some ideas that are obviously canned inside the robot, but still for the child, it's an opportunity. Here you see robots who are creators. You see here musical robots that compose and play. And you see a hand without body robot, which makes drawings of people's faces in its own little style, let's say. Then the third option is that humans and robots co-create. And Nigel Stanford is an example of a real live human musician who says he digs robots and makes beats with robots. And you see his robot partner who's playing the piano as he plays other instruments, and the robot is creating as they go, kind of improvising. Okay, but when you think about why humans have trouble to create, is because they are often stuck with standard ideas in their regular way of thinking, which is good for their daily life, because a lot of daily life is doing regular things and succeeding in tasks that you repeat. And if everybody does it the same way, everybody gets a good result. For example, you have a task, how to leave your house in the morning, and you go through the front door like everybody, and it's a good solution. You don't need to be creative in most of your human life. And so we're getting sometimes stuck. Well, robots can help people get unstuck from their standard ideas by making some kind of weird robotic suggestion that is like a random stimuli. And you say, wow, that's really weird. Let me try to integrate that. Robots, they have trouble to make sense of the world. They're quite good at generating all kinds of weird, meaningless things, but they need a lot of training, thousands and thousands of repetitive examples in order to do some of the more simple stuff, suggesting to us humans that there is a certain concept of robot stupidity, which is prevalent in that species, and thereby giving us a feeling of feeling good about ourselves compared to those stupid robots. But robots, because they don't know much, tend to do and suggest and do strange behaviors, which are actually a source of novelty if it can be captured by those robots. So robots have the problem of getting things to be meaningful. If you ever saw drawings made by robot machines, they generate 10,000 totally weird drawings in a couple minutes. And usually there's a human who's looking them over and choosing one and saying, that's what I'm going to show what my robot did. Okay? Most of them are just purely junky drawings. Whereas humans, they produce stuff that has meaning, but it's hard for them to produce much stuff, in fact. It all comes down to semantic networks that robots and humans both have and need. Well, robots need to learn it. And when you have a semantic network, you have a bunch of concepts that are related in certain ways, and it helps guide how you think. Okay? So it's good, but it's also bad, because creativity means breaking away from the well-known semantic network that helps make sense of things. And so the more robots learn, the more creativity becomes difficult for them. Humans have greatly developed semantic networks that are so powerful, it's hard to escape. And here, as you know, when robots are most performant, they have learned in a very limited environment to do a very repetitive task, and everything goes well every day as they do the same thing over and over, and they do very, very well. This is super boring for humans, so we're happy that they take care of these kind of tasks. But this is where the robots in a very constrained universe can show their optimal performance, in fact, because when you ask them to do stuff in unconstrained environments, they kind of don't have enough world knowledge. They don't have a big enough network, really. Here you see a Shimon, who is a robot composer, learned 5,000 songs in a very repetitive way, and is now able to make some compositions and do some improvisation playing in an orchestra with those with a few real live musicians. So this is just an example of a robot composer. In fact, a key concept for us is mental models. Humans have a kind of an abstract model that's a reduced version of the complexity of the real world out there. And based on that model, we get predictable in how we act. But not everybody has exactly the same mental model as shown in this drawing. So when you talk about an iceberg, for some people, the mental model is a piece of ice floating around. And for others, it's a piece of ice floating in a drink that they're having at a cocktail. And so the differences in mental models, which also varies culturally, is a source of creative thinking at the individual level. So to the extent that we build up robots' mental models, they may get less creative in a way. The problem with humans is their mental models are too developed and they can't break away. So I thought it was interesting to highlight the mirror image problem of robots and humans. Here's some studies by Oliveira and colleagues in which human children are playing with a robot, which looks like a flower pot, but it has wheels. And this robot, because not all robots need to look like little people, this robot moves around in strange ways on the floor as the human children have to invent a story. And then the human children see this strange movement and they metaphorically interpret it as meaning something in the context of their story because they have a mental model. And they say when the robot is moving in zigzag, the robot is unhappy, which is just simply based on their mental model of emotions. Because a robot doesn't know anything, it's just moving in random patterns. Sometimes the robot turns around in circles, and they say the robot is dancing. Of course, the robot doesn't know about dancing. So you see, it's an illustration of how these robots, by doing random movements, might stimulate the children to use their mental model in a storytelling context and integrate something they wouldn't put in their normal story model. So the question is, where are we going between humans and robots? Are they our friend and partner, or are they our enemy? Of course, we know from Asimov that a robot shall do no harm to a human. However, will a robot be able to take over creative jobs that are currently human, where we say, okay, they can do the basic stuff, they can ship packages or whatever, but the creative stuff, that's the human stuff. So the question is, are creative people a threatened species in the future? So to summarize, we've been talking about how humans can be creative, robots can be creative, and humans with robots can be creative. Robots, they got trouble to make sense of the world. That's why generating originality is no problem. Making any meaning and choosing what original ideas are actually worth expressing is a big problem for robots. Whereas humans, we're so good at meaning that we're stuck in our mental models, which are mostly shared culturally. And so we have a lot of trouble to escape and do anything too original. And bringing it back to reality is absolutely no problem. And so the future is it humans versus robots, or humans and robots, one big happy family? I like to say that there's my email, and you may be interested in our scientific society, which several of the speakers today are part of, and you can check it out online. And if you're interested, you get in touch to be a member. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Todd. And thank you for pitching the ICCI. I'm honored to be a member as well, and many others. Is it run by robots, you think?
Not yet.
Not yet. Well, you know, after your talk, look, a round of applause. Thank you so much. Now we have about 7 minutes for questions, so we can even do about 3 questions. I'm sure many people got interested. I got reminded also of Giovanni here and his questions or ideas about organic creativity and many other people who work with technology. Any questions for Todd? Well, look, we have Fabio who asks on the chat, is a robot able to trust a human? What do you think?
If you can define trust in a way that it can be programmed, in other words, like what does trust mean? It means that I trust that, is it somehow the predictive nature of humans? Is it that the robot can have no fear that the human will not throw it in the garbage can, you know? So there again, it's a good question. It brings up the whole concept of what does trust mean for a robot?
Excellent. Any other questions for Todd?
Yeah, maybe, or
yeah, sure, Claude.
There was one in the chat, so I don't know which one you want to.
If you want to just go with it, and then we can read that.
Yes. So for me, yeah, there's a question of definition here that I don't necessarily catch, because I mean, there are different models if you think of robots somehow. I mean, you have the pure artificial intelligence or something like that, where the robots are supposed to learn by reinforcement learning or any other mechanisms. And there are some more random things, okay? And for me, I mean, if you think of reinforcement learning, the classical algorithms usually have a pretty strong inertia after a while. I mean, they're either untrained and then they are closer to random decisions. And in that case, is it really creative to have that kind of random patterns or something like this? Okay, purely random behavior. This is something that we could mimic also in the real world by just well, throwing a dice and taking the decision that way. Okay, and on the opposite side, when they are finished learning, they usually do what they are supposed to do. They do make sense, but we don't see necessarily the logic they have. You know, there's a whole bunch of works on explainable artificial intelligence, because one of the big problems of artificial intelligence is that what the algorithms do, we don't get it, we don't understand it, so we have problems trusting what the AIs do. So here I see two opposites, purely random and inertia, but that we don't necessarily catch. And I wonder where the creativity lies. I mean, is it the random process? Is it in the thing that we don't understand, or is it somewhere in the middle of the learning process? That's, I mean, it's more discussion than a question, really.
Yeah,
but,
yeah. Thanks. That is a very good point. I'm happy you raised that whole issue, and it makes me think. So, since it's not a question, I'll just discuss also. Discussion on discussion is that it makes me think of the computer that learned how to play Go. I think it was Go, or it was chess, but in any case, Go, I believe. And it played against the best Go player human in the world, and it won. And then the human looked at the strategy that the Go computer had learned by many learning over and over thousands and thousands of play moves of Go. And the computer, in fact, had explored and developed strategies in a play space that no humans ever went into in the Go game. And the human Go player was marveled by this play space of Go that all humans had avoided, not explored, in fact. So I think that the computer doesn't, let's say, know what is Go. It's just doing a neural network type of pattern matching. But in a way, it created a new strategy that no humans had thought of that led it to win in a certain game. So I think there is a intermediate space, which is the most rich area. I see that there are things in the chat.
Comments actually in the chat, and we can't probably answer or address all of them, unfortunately. I mean, we have about 3 minutes left, but we also have a final discussion. I see Giovanni left a longer comment about a new bunch of law working on regulations for intellectual property generated by artificial intelligence. It is a big problem, and the only solution appears to be that also the officer awarding agents must be aided by artificial intelligence. Otherwise, checking a proposed patent against previous art becomes impossible for a bare human. Giovanni, do you have anything to add to this question, or or Todd, did you understand them? It's about patents and how we make intellectual property, I think, when artificial intelligence is involved.
Yes, yes, I see that. Well, you know, intellectual property laws were designed and are modified to open or shut down the funnel of new ideas in the marketplace. So they give advantages to authors or disadvantages so that ideas that are produced can be kept personalized for profit longer or shorter. So the fact that AI machines are going to produce new ideas which can be monetized in the marketplace, use products, is, you would say, a whole new field. It has to be developed socially how to deal with this new ideas. Just as a simple recognition, however, it seems that sometimes AI can actually generate some stuff that has some real world innovative value. So
Right.
thank Giovanni simply for that, raising that issue.
Yeah, just wanted to say that this is happening already at a very, very fast pace. And the Turing test for patents has already been passed. So patents have been submitted, generated by artificial intelligence, and the officer could not know that this was not a human, but it was an artificial intelligence that submitted that patent.
Wow.
Yes. Nice, nice.
A brave new world.
Not so nice, but it's happening.
Well, I think it all speaks to your point, Todd, here. And we had other questions around, sadly, we don't have a lot of time, but around the meaning of creativity. If robots cannot really interpret what they do the way a human would, is that still called creativity? I think your point is that we have different strengths and weaknesses compared to robots. And I really like that mirror image that you proposed. So,
I just reply to that, Vlad, 1 second.
Sure.
You know, there's a lot of humans who produce output, and other people recognize the value of it. And the creator doesn't know what we're talking about, doesn't even see the value of their idea. We call that some kind of a co-creation societal valuation of an idea that somebody gave and other people recognize its value. So we have a similar thing happening potentially with robots. So I just wanted to go on the record. I got nothing against robots, and if they take over, they should see this talk on video and recognize my benevolence to their species.
You will be spared. Excellent. Thank you so much again, Todd. So now we move on to Chronis. Chronis Kignios from University of Athens, Creativity in Education, Learning Computational Thinking Through Game Modding. So maybe we'll get a step closer to understanding robots. I don't know, a little bit. Chronis, can you share your slides? Excellent, thank you. Sorry, and sorry for my mispronunciation of your name. Kinigos, right? How would you pronounce Kinigos?
Kinigos. And start the video, right. So yeah, well, this is a little bit on the other side. It's on the challenge that we have to create situations, to generate situations where we can see more dense opportunities for creativity emerging, not just in young people, but also in society. Now that we have technology, so how can we use technology to see creativity in contexts where maybe we didn't think that creativity could apply that much, or maybe we're not ready yet to address creativity. And I call these contexts wicked problems. Some of you may be familiar with them. Some of you may not. It's a buzzword in the European Union at the moment for education. So let me get down to what I mean with all these things. Let me just find my slider in amongst the windows on the screen. Right. So first of all, there's different aspects to this. This is about educational engineering and trying to generate tools and contexts for people to safely engage in social creativity and individual creativity about difficult problems. So one of those ways to do this is to provide them tools where you lower the stakes of what is going on. And these tools with technology, we can enable deep structural access of users to these tools. So we can create games where the role of the user of the tool is not just to play the game, but also to question the game and to change the rules of the game or the content of the game, and think about the issues embedded in the rules of the game and the context. So this is considered as generating computational thinking. Computational thinking is not just learning about computers, but it's considered a 21st century skill involving not just concepts, but also practices, mindsets, and the essence of being a digital citizenship in humans. And like other 21st century skills, such as creativity or critical thinking or collaboration, it goes beyond traditional education, which I call focusing on siloed approaches. I teach mathematics, or I teach language, or I teach history, and addressing issues that are broader, issues that involve not just exclusively deep understanding of the concepts in education, but issues that have opaque, not so clear cause and effect relationships, and issues where there are alternative approaches to what is objective, what is the truth, and they address the same fact in different kinds of ways, influenced by value systems or by histories or by stakes. So what are wicked problems? Wicked problems are complex problems. They are dynamic, they change all the time, like environmental problem, climate change, water, dietary problems, and other such problems. They interact with, they don't stand alone, they interact with other fields. They are conflicting. There's incomplete information about them because so much information is needed that it is impossible to gather all of it. They're based on opinions and value structures, and there are diverse stakeholders and solutions. So what about education and technology and game modding and creativity within wicked problems, or for wicked problems? What can you do with this technology? Well, you can create games. You can create situations where people use, construct, tinker with, and discuss about digital tools where there is you intentionally lower the stakes of the situation. So you cannot change you cannot change something to do with the climate by playing a game, but you can think about it and you can grapple with the problem, and you can get more deeply in there and come up with ideas of what to do, or ideas of what this problem is about. These games are for individuals, and but also for collaborative engagement with. You can discuss a game, you can discuss how to change it, you can share it with others, and you can offer a game that you have built for others to mod, to change. And also they involve this production and change of what we call wicked issues or socio-scientific issues, with games where the player has choices that have consequences and they need to stay on the game to do that. So what about creativity, games, and wicked problems? Combining everything, we are dealing with larger issues, not silo issues involving only deep understanding of concepts. We are thinking about the kind of tools that are constructionist tools. They allow changing, building, and having deep structural access in the functionalities and the rules with which these tools were made. There is a free climate, and it is possible to think of simulations and alternative realities. There are lower stakes, of course, and these tools work with humans or with groups of humans as a framework, as a reference for discussion and debate, and as a reference for productivity. Not just the rules, but also the content of a game can be open to modding. And there are different rules to games. There are rules with respect to reaction in time or scoring, or games, exploration games, where you gather things and you move on by finding solutions on how to move on. But there are also sustainability games, the kind of game that you are a good player the longer you can stay on the game. So this is the kind of game I want to talk to you about. So we are talking about pedagogical engineering, how to generate situations for humans to engage in creativity using these kind of tools and for this kind of context. Well, one of the things that needs to be done is not just the tools, is to organize, orchestrate groups of people who come from different places in order to think about and change the game. We call them communities of interest, diverse communities where creativity emerges from the fact that people are very different and they bring different histories and knowledge to the problem. We're talking about situations that have a joint enterprise. They want to build a game or they want to change the game. And then the objects under which are tinkered with or constructed become boundary objects. They become objects around which people try and understand each other, cross boundaries from their own context and history, and then come back to what they know and think about it in a different way. We also need situations where people engage in different roles according to the group they're in. You know, you're in a group where you're the fast thinker, and then you change groups, and then everybody's faster than you, and so you have to play a different role. You're the knowledge bearer, or you're the technician. You bring the technical knowledge, or you bring the theoretical knowledge, according to who you are collaborating with. So this role fluidity is something which is not very familiar, especially to young people, and we need to find ways to help them with it, help them grapple with their sense of having many different identities according to the groups that they engage with. Also lowering the stakes. This is important. Our education system is really fluxed with high stake exams and with everything being terribly important, the consequences of what you do. It's important to find places where you can be calm and creative and not worry about the consequences. Also co-construction, we have very individualized education systems, and students are not used to, even though we say in innovation that we get them to do projects and co-create and stuff like that, this is not the mainstream, and there are different, there are things that students need to learn in order to be able to co-construct and to collaborate. And the whole situation involves the design of contexts and tools to enable and to provide dense opportunities for the above. Yeah. So I'm going to show you one such tool, which has been developed in my lab. It's quite original, and the more we use it, the more we are surprised by the kind of games that different kinds of diverse communities create and generate. It's called Choices with Consequences, and it's just a simple tool. You can put content in it and change the rules and change the value of the consequences, but the player just makes different choices, but there is no choice with only positive or only negative consequences. So they have to wade through the tool and try to hang on as long as possible without going under or over some red line. So they look like very well-known games like the Empires and SimCity, Civilization. But here you can delve deeper in the game. You can create your own contexts and you can change the rules. So the designer of the games has to grapple with not just scientific issues, but also with wider issues of societal issues or issues that involve wicked problems. So let me just show you three very different examples of things that people have done with this tool. There's no time to go live into it, but imagine that you are a citizen and you want to survive in your city by having good ethics and good mindset and good habits in relation to the city's sustainability. So one of your choices is to go to a fast food. What will happen if you do that? Then you have some consequences along certain values, value of health, environmental ethics, mood, action, and money. So you see your health goes down, your ethics are the pits, but your mood goes up. So there's something good about going to occasionally going to a fast food, but there's a lot of bad things about it. So you can't continually go to fast food because you'll run out of health and you'll run out of ethics, brownie points, and you will inertia will throw you out of the game. Now, the importance is that this was designed with a colleague of mine who is in environmental technology, environmental education, a specialist. It was given to teachers. We gave a different version of the tool to teachers and asked them what's wrong with it. And they wanted to change the game to make it educationally valuable. So this is what they came up with. So what you see is already a mod, which we intentionally gave the teachers to do. In a very different situation, this is a tool that was built by experts in textile industry. And these are the consequences of choosing different kinds of fabrics to generate clothes. So in this example, if you use spandex, then you have along different values, which is global warming, eutrophication, which is like water pollution, and water scarcity. And you have conflicting consequences here as well. So you need to change every time and think about the kind of clothes that you design and you generate if you want to be a company who is environmentally friendly. And the third example is now kids. We gave them a nutrition tool and we asked them to change the tool as much as they want. And they thought to make the following change and address the following wicked problem. If you're in a class and you have set certain activities, what are the consequences going to be? So if you start playing with your smartphone, you get pluses in joy, you get minus in boredom because you are not bored, you get minus in health, minus in knowledge, and plus in danger. But this is according to the kids and what the kids felt. There's a wicked problem, and what they did with something that we gave them, but that was very different. So these are very different situations with the same kind of tool, creating contexts where people can engage in discussing what is a wicked problem, in discussing how to generate a game in a creative way, but also how to be creative about how to address the problem. And it's just a simple case of pedagogical engineering, of coming up with ways in which we can engage not just students, but even in corporate situations, engage people with low stakes, serious games in generating creativity in situations that are so pertinent in the days that we live. And that's about it. I don't know if I've run out of time or I'm ahead of time.
No, you're perfectly on time. Perfect.
Right. And here's some other publications about this, apart from the things that we were doing with Vlad and the creativity group.
Excellent.
So thank you.
Thank you very much, Kronis. And let us give you a virtual round of applause here. So, any questions from Kronis? Very, very interesting and also very concrete presentation in terms of examples. You can also use the chat if you would like. Questions or reflections?
I have a small question, or do I have to sign up?
You don't have to sign up.
Okay,
just be there.
It's very interesting, Kronis. And it reminded me a little bit about, I also have roles. You know my research from before. So are these roles in these teams, are they specific roles that the students are given? Like you talked about a fast thinker, or how do you do that?
Well, this is the idea of pedagogical engineering, if you like, which is it's not only for schools. You can either orchestrate groups with specific roles, or you can allow the situation to generate different roles according to people's wishes. So, sometimes the joint enterprise is what is first priority, and it doesn't matter what kind of knowledge the groups bring into this joint enterprise. Other times, you can do this on purpose, and you can have a presupposition of roles that you want to engage in a particular problem, because it's important to get these kind of people to think about it.
Exactly.
And that's where the creativity is. So it's up to the kind of situation that you want to orchestrate or generate or inspire.
Yeah, because my experience was that, especially with students, when they could sort of play with challenger role and be the one who is not agreeing, and that was something that they really thought was fun, and it helped them become creative, because it also helped them to sort of think in new ways and new perspectives, like, you know, Vlad's research is much about that. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Ingunn. Anyone else? Any other comment or reflection? I have a curiosity in terms of what is the future, Kronis, in terms of these games you're working on. Are you exploring more domains, or what direction are you taking? We're just going deeper with this paradigm and these roles. What are you doing at the moment?
Yeah, well, my interest is to follow up the process of creativity in groups.
Mm.
So we like different contexts, of course, and it's very nice because we learn different things. In this project we have with textile engineering, I've been learning things that I never knew existed of a world that I never knew existed. But we consider this just to be an added value for us. What we want to look into deeper is where creativity generates in diverse groups, and how can we enable this, and even how can we encourage this.
Excellent. Well, maybe in the next year's edition, in person or online or both, or taken over by robots, we're gonna see more of that. Thank you so much, Kronis, again.
Thank you.
And we have a big influx of Polish participants who have taken our numbers above 50. So it must mean that Maciej is coming up to present. So Maciej Karwowski will talk to us about what drives what on the dynamics of creativity achievement links. Maciej, can you share your PowerPoint if you have any?
Yeah, let me try to do so. I assume you can see this already. Okay, so thanks Vlad. I wasn't aware that there is a growing audience.
Oh yes.
Thank you guys for having me. And as Vlad mentioned at the very beginning, getting back to this 2017 and our initial meeting in Geneva, that was quite a journey, I would say. So what I'm going to present today is another brick in this wall. So this is like quite a natural continuation, I would say. So let me start with this 2017 when we've met. And 2017 was quite a specific, because we just published together with Ola Gajda and Ron Beghetto a pretty large meta-analysis. And this meta-analysis concerned the links between creativity as it usually operationalized in psychology of creativity, so mainly divergent thinking, and school or academic achievement. And contrary to what many people expected, what we found was a weak yet still positive link, so positive correlation. Some people claimed, of course, that school kills creativity, that specifically creative students do badly in schools. What we found was a correlation of 0.22, so not impressive, but still positive, still significant. Of course, such a correlation leaves you a huge room of exceptions. So you can find quite easily extremely creative students who do badly at school, and those who are great students but not necessarily so creative, and so on. And of course, we weren't particularly satisfied with this finding, because this finding was quite, I would say, static. So this is like a correlation between two phenomena, and you know nothing about those mechanisms behind those links. So we started to think that first thing is probably that this correlation could even be overrated or overestimated, because there are several confounds we did not control, like intelligence, like openness, like persistence, and so on. So there are several things that drive both creativity and school achievement that weren't included into this analysis. Secondly, we started to think that perhaps the measurement matters, and the measurement fails because when we measure school achievement or academic achievement, we usually focus on correctness or appropriateness, or whether the answer is appropriate. While when we measure creativity, of course, we say that we are interested in both originality and novelty, but we pay special attention to originality. So perhaps those measures are a little bit disjointed, and that's why this correlation might be underestimated looking at that. So we started to think about new ways how to measure it rigorously, but at the same time to bring those two concepts a little bit together. And here, where this special issue mentioned comes into the stage, and what we proposed in this special issue was still static, but not as static as this meta-analysis, because what we proposed that, of course, when we consider creativity and learning or achievement separately as separate constructs, so divergent thinking versus tests, we usually obtain correlations like 0.20. The ideal all of us would like to go to is a situated dynamic assessment, probably experimental, working when we develop creativity through learning through creativity, when those two are interconnected. That's problematic from the measurement point of view. So we decided that we will meet somewhere between, and we developed what we called CLISAT. CLISAT is creative learning in school achievement tests, so that we bring both those things. And we thought about it in that way that this is a part of the larger process. There is no time to describe this process in detail. The process developed by Ron Beghetto, the process of how learning and creativity interrelate. And in fact, of course, it depends on the position we take. For some people, creativity and learning are the same phenomenon. For some people, they are interrelated. That depends whether you are taking more Piagetian perspective or more Guilfordian perspective, whether this is rooted in sociocultural theorizing, cognitive, and so on. No really time to do so, but let us get back to this CLISAT, because we thought about this CLISAT in such a way that we constructed quite a broad test that covered both maths and language. In that case, it was Polish language. And it was organized in such a way that creativity and school achievement or parts of learning weren't disjoint, but they were clearly connected. So we constructed that in such a way that there were different so-called testlets or blocks. And those blocks were organized in such a way that each block started with some kind of knowledge-based tasks. So pretty similar to what you usually have in PISA or normal standard school achievement tests, mainly memory-based, but also problem-solving based. And then those tasks were used also for some creative processes, like let you develop, imagine, try to do so. So there were there were several blocks consisting of both knowledge-based and creativity-based or creative processes-based tasks, in both language and math part. So just to give you a clue, it could start with something like this, that you've got quite a typical geometrical tasks, that is a task of diagram of cuboid, and then you've got something when you are invited to develop some geometrical figures into, to divide them originally, to generate as many solutions as possible, and so on and so forth. So for both parts, the math part and the language part, we developed this set of different processes with the hope in our mind that will embed these creative processes more into the school-based tasks. And because of that, maybe we will have this possibility and opportunity to obtain the links and the strength of those relationships that will be more realistic than what we found in this early meta-analysis. This was presented in this special issue Vlad mentioned. So what we found was generally quite logical, I would say, and normally working well as a proof of validity of this test. So as you can see, for instance, academic achievement in math and language was highly correlated with each other, which is quite normal in the studies on academic achievement, while in case of creativity, the correlation is significant but quite weak, which shows domain specificity, I would say. Intelligence predicted more strongly academic achievement than creativity, but still, of course, even in the case of creativity, those links are quite similar to what we normally observed in literature. And importantly, those blue numbers are correlations between let's call it creativity in math, maybe not necessarily creative learning, because that's still static, that's achievement, and academic achievement. And yet, as you can see, those correlations right now are in 40s, not 20s as we observed. So what we found is that you can increase relationship when both those things are more contextually interrelated within one instrument. But this is still, of course, correlational. That tells us very little about potential mechanisms. But what was interesting is that when you take a look at those figures, of course, what is presented is the scatter plots with correlations, but we were much more interested in quite a specific pattern that could be identified on both those figures. And this pattern was recently described in terms of so-called NCA, so necessary condition analysis. So the question, to what extent one variable, in our case this knowledge-based variable, could be considered a necessary and not sufficient condition of the other. So this logic is a logic, let's call it Bloomian, like in this classic Bloom pyramid, when you've got the knowledge at the bottom of the pyramid and creativity at the highest level. The assumption here would be that it is necessary to have a certain level of basic knowledge to creatively develop this knowledge, and without this knowledge, being creative is perhaps not impossible, but quite difficult. And what is observed here is what is especially interesting is this left upper corner, and this left upper corner on both those figures is virtually empty. So in our study, pretty large study, as you can see, there were no cases, no participants who scored high on creativity tasks and low on this knowledge base. So it seemed like those classic, for many quite archaic interpretations of Bloom, that you need to have these basic fundamentals to become creative, found a confirmation in those initial studies we presented in this special issue of Creativity Research Journal. But that's still correlational, that's still classic. This is quite a controversial to what extent creative learning and developing creative ideas really require this knowledge. Perhaps you can at the same time develop knowledge while engaging creative processes, and this process could be much more dynamic. And of course that requires experiments, but it also requires, in our case, much better designs. And we use such a design, and this is this new brick, this another brick in this wall, and this is a absolutely fresh finding from the ongoing study, because this study was planned and it is conducted as cross-sequential, which means this is longitudinal on two cohorts. So let's call it longitudinal for our reasons. So what we have right now are two coded waves. So we've got this school achievement measured 2 times, in fact, already 3 or 4 times, but two waves are coded. And we've got this creativity within school subjects coded 2 times. And what we observe is presented here for the generalized math and language. I will show you math in a moment. So what we see on the left side is that the correlation in wave 1 and wave 2, both those correlations are pretty robust, I would say. So school achievement or school-related processes and creativity-related processes, when we measure them on the same content, on the same material, are not as independent as we tended to believe previously. They are quite robustly correlated. That's the first thing. The stability of those both things is not impressive, but of course it is higher for school achievement from wave to wave than for creativity. I said of course because that's something we expected. But probably what is the most important here are the so-called cross-lagged links. So to what extent creativity during wave 1 translates into school achievement during wave 2, and to what extent school achievement during wave 1 translates into creativity during wave 2, and this is exactly what is illustrated right now. So as you can see, we see there are links in both directions. So this question in the title, what drives what, both drives each other. So it seems that those creativity relevant processes translate into higher school achievement a year later, because wave 2 was conducted a year later. However, those school related processes and more knowledge-based skills translate into creativity 1 year later. So it's not necessarily as Bloom only assumed or Bloom interpreters, but also what discovery learning theorists and constructivism in general proposes. So you need creativity is engaged into the process of learning itself. When we look at math, which is quite specific, the pattern is quite similar, but still, when we look at those cross-lagged links, the link from creativity to school achievement even seems to be higher, slightly higher than from math, from school achievement to creativity. In fact, those two coefficients, so 0.15 and 0.20, are statistically non-distinguishable. They are the same, so there are no statistically significant differences. So in fact, what we observe is that the relationship is reciprocal in a sense. Of course, that tells us very little about causality. This is longitudinal but not experimental, that could show us some directions but not necessarily explain the mechanisms or the causality itself. So still the question about the possible mechanism is a pretty important question here, because of course there could be cognitive mechanisms. We can say that more creative people use specific strategies, perhaps more effective strategies to learn more effectively. It could be social processes. It could be that in some classes, that in some relationships, this process differs. It could be motivational things as well, like creative self-concept that is related to those things. We tested one of such links, assuming that creative self-concept, so the conviction, that the confidence that I could be creative during my math classes, we measured that using specifically developed scale for it, that it could serve as such kind of mediator. This is motivational variable that is quite crucial, we believe. What we observed is that indeed, this is this low parameter at the bottom of the slide, that indeed there is so-called indirect effect. So we see some arguments that previous school achievement translates into higher confidence that I can be creative during math classes. So it seems like a courage to create, like the freedom that I'm allowed to be creative because I've got this basic knowledge and I know how to use it. And that translates into higher creativity. Of course, that's just one potential mechanism. Probably there is plenty of such potential mechanisms. The other way around, so from math creativity to school achievement through this creative self-efficacy, this effect seems to be weaker. So to summarize, what we observe, and this process is somehow ongoing. And of course, this process is still, and I must acknowledge that even if the study is large and is longitudinal, it's still static in that sense that we measure quite stable characteristics and we measure end products. We are interested in learning and creativity, but what we measure is school achievement, in fact, so performance in both tests, and that's unfortunate. This is why this study had several legs. One huge leg is this longitudinal study, but at the very same time, what we are doing some experimental stuff which are much smaller in terms of the sample size, but when we explore how kids solve different tasks, what strategies they are using, and how the strategies could inform their learning. And at the very same time, we are doing some observational studies within classrooms to understand better how teachers and peer-to-peer interactions could influence those processes. But for the short summary of this journey from 2017, when we started with this very basic correlation, right now we see that this correlation, when appropriately estimated, seems to be much higher. That's the first thing. But the second is that the issue of the the relationships in both directions seems to be much more correlated. This is not only knowledge-based Bloomian logic that fundamentals influence creativity. We know that creativity as a process, not as a skill, not as an ability, but as a process, is engaged into the process of learning. Several developmental psychologists already demonstrated it, mainly Henry Markovich. So we see this both directions logic pretty well. I think this is 15th minutes, even 16th, so I must finish right now. So let me just acknowledge the financial support of National Science Center that funded this study, and my colleagues Dorota Jankowska, Ron Begetto, Arek Brzeski, Marta Czerwonka, Ola Gajda, and Iza Lepuda, who coded all this stuff, and believe me, it was a lot of coding. So thank you very much, and happy to...
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you so much, Maciej. Look, a round of applause for you virtually. So this is great. You know, I know your work, obviously, and I'm always impressed with it. And I feel like you are the closest to a quali, holistic, interdependent study that you can get with quant measures. You're getting closer and closer. And of course, what fascinates me about your work is the way you intertwine and you put together quantitative and qualitative data collection to kind of make the same point or research the same question. So well done. Any questions for Maciej? We don't have a lot of time, but I'm, you know, any curiosity or question? It's a good moment. Any clarification?
I got a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, Vlad, I can hear you.
Very
Oh,
kind of.
Do you look at the delta in academic math achievement, time 1 to 2, related to the delta in creativity math, time 1 to 2?
Yeah, and probably, yeah, because of this pretty fast pace, I didn't mention that. In fact, what you do in such a model that is cross-lagged model, you in a sense explain a change. So you exactly explain delta, because this is regression model when you control for the initial level. So sorry for being very, very technical right now, but what you are explaining is the residual. So exactly the delta. But answering the, let's say, the preposition that wasn't exactly asked, the deltas weren't huge. And that's the problem. So because both grow, of course, both increased. So creativity increased and achievement increased, but this increase wasn't very high, which of course limits the possibility to explain, because if there is no huge variance between wave 1 and wave 2, there is not much to be explained, of course. That's why we are looking into wave 3. We are looking into subsequent waves, and we hope that this variability will be larger. So that's the point. But eventually we did it. We explained delta. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we have to get technical at some point.
Yeah. Sorry for that.
No, it's very good. Any final remarks? Otherwise, I'm gonna again give you a round of applause, Maciej, and start on a much simpler and non-technical presentation, which is my own, together with Constance. So 3 years have passed, and when we had our symposium at Webster, we worked also with Claude on understanding malevolent online creativity. I think there are a lot of ways in which people try to romanticize and celebrate what happens when we are on social media, a lot of participation, a lot of democracy, a lot of creativity, meeting other people. But we were very interested by the darker side of that, as it relates especially to migration. This course is about migration. So we looked at, from anything from misinformation spread online to how creatively people demean others. But now I'm going to present something else to you, because within that time frame, of course, COVID came, many things happened, and we all found ourselves online much more. Maybe not directly on social media in particular, although I'm sure all of us used it at some point. And that raises again the question of how do we create, and how do we learn, and what do we learn online? So I'm going to try to be quite brief in setting up the kind of context of this interest. Of course, creativity, as we know, we've heard today as well, is a process we engage in when we lack a rehearsed, or I would say a already learned solution. So just to emphasize that, of course, there is a more static aspect to learning that is reflected in knowledge we acquire. And then there is a more dynamic process of actual learning with ing as a process. And that's when creativity and learning become sometimes indistinguishable. COVID presents us with many opportunities for creativity and learning, because there are times of crisis. There are times in which old solutions don't work anymore. There is something that throws out of the window anything that we supposedly knew. And many of these situations involve basically the necessity of creating and learning new things. Apologies, I'm also trying to admit new people at the same time. So what we did was we were spoiled. We went spoiled by Reddit. We went directly to a forum. We took memes as an example of creativity online. It's quite a fascinating phenomenon, the internet memes spreading everywhere, and basically adding new little twists to existing narratives and existing templates. And that's maybe a mini, or let's say little c form of creativity, and yet pervasive, especially in online spaces. So we focused on this Reddit community, coronavirus memes, that I think exists still. And what we found there are all sorts of images. Some of them you might have known by now. So we have Kermit the Frog coronavirus memes are spreading faster than the virus, which I think might be true, at least at some points in time. I'm no expert on COVID, but this is the cure for those who remember. And then there's another template that is one of my favorites, with this dog in a burning house and just kind of with a cup of coffee, time to reopen the economy. And finally, a new one with quite a chubby baby eating snacks, the first night of the quarantine. So what we have here is an example of how directly you can see how there are cultural elements that exist out there online, in the online environment, like the template with the dog, or probably the chubby baby is also present. Kermit and the tea is definitely one of the favorites. And what people do is they mix and match, and they take something old and they add a new spin to it. But they do much more than that. They become political at times. If you look at the government meme here, they also do this in order to maintain connections with others. And in a way, they kind of maintain a level of mental health and sanity during this time by creating new meanings about the pandemic. So what we were interested in, and here it's myself, Constance, and a colleague, Ioana Literat from Columbia University, who helped us on two of these studies. We were interested in three things. So we did three different studies. One was to look at the representations of the pandemic. So we used something called social representations theory. It's a theory of how we construct social knowledge about new objects like COVID, right? That just swept us over. And we have different processes proposed by this theory. So one of them is objectification, how the abstract becomes concrete. What kind of concrete forms do we give it to understand something that is so radically new in a way? Anchoring is how we take the current situation and we anchor it within domains of knowledge or activity that we know about. And identification processes. So we also considered how groups, us versus them, are being formed online during the pandemic. So for this study, we analyzed 1,544 memes out of more than 22,000 memes collected, scraped from Reddit. And we applied both a quantitative and qualitative look at these memes. And then we went further. We noticed, as I'm going to mention in a moment, that most of the memes were, or no, not most, but some of the most exciting memes, the ones that were really commented on, were actually political. So we used a second study. We did a second study using narrative psychology to understand the political narratives embedded within 241 memes. And finally, of course, there is an interest in creativity and what makes a meme creative. So we had people code 480 memes for variables usually associated with creativity, like surprise, humor, in this case, quite unique and quite specific for the meme culture, meaningfulness, elaboration, and overall creativity. So I'm going to give you just a little taste of what we found here. The big study, the one with over 1,500 memes, led us to understand something about on the top left there. You have different ways of anchoring the debate. So most of the people in the online community, of course, anchored what was happening with the pandemic in the big domain of media and popular culture. So it was a lot about using all these existing templates, references to movies, references to stories, and applying them to the new context. But then geography came up as well. Of course, as the pandemic started, there was a lot of interest in how the virus was spreading. Politics, as I said, very important. History, so historical references, many of them to the plague, and so on. And then in the bottom left, you have an idea about objectification. What were the exact elements that appeared in memes? In most of them, it was something around protection and transmission of the virus, and protective measures followed. So basically anything to do with anything, from the face mask to hand gel, sanitizer, to more serious medical equipment, and also to the quarantine. This was what dominated, obviously, the memes. But then you have, going a bit down the line, things about shopping and stockpiling, a big theme. The chubby baby didn't get chubby out of the blue. Then you have the spread of the virus and something on infected people, and China, the origin of the virus, appear. And then we also looked at, if we look on the bottom in the right corner, we have different references to specific groups. So most of the memes talked about the perspective of the meme maker. So usually these are people who tend to respect the measures, and sometimes look at other people who don't respect them in disbelief. So a lot of it was about the surprise, the shock, or the anger at these other people who are not respecting the measures. So that was the in group. Then, of course, there were specific references to Asian people. It's a big theme, and about the origin of the virus. People who don't respect measure, the out group. Also about essential workers and medical workers who became prominent figures during this time. And on the top left, we have different aims of these memes. So a lot of them engaged in political and social critique, and that's why we wanted to go deeper into that direction. But also some of them gave advice, practical advice, or parodied misinformation that was being spread online. So just to give you a quick example, if I can find, yes, a quick example of a few memes that we can see in what categories they belong to. For the average American, the best way to tell if you have COVID is to cough in a rich person's face and wait for their test results. So this is clearly something around the transmission of the virus, if we are to code it, right? It's something about political, social critique as well, speaking about inequality, the difference between rich and the poor. Then we have down there, me watching people not following social distancing from my window. Yes, idiots. So here we have the in-group, out-group aspect. One of my favorites with, you see one of the common templates for memes with Batman, slapping Robin or someone, I don't even know exactly who, but the Batman slap is quite famous. And in 2020, you have socially distant slapping. So here we talk about measures and protective measures. And another one, so memes come in all shapes and forms, and some of them have a lot of text, some of them have images, or a combination. Maybe for quarantine watching Castaway, really, his best friends with the ball, me during quarantine, look at you go, Roomba, you crazy SOB. So here we have something about changes in life habits and the effects of the quarantine. So we looked at all these memes and we tried to group, as you saw, in different categories. And we also did something I don't have the time to talk about now, but we traced the temporal dynamic of these different topics. So we noticed how it was very, very shifting and very much following, of course, current events. So the way in which, for instance, China was referenced heavily at the beginning, but almost not at all towards the end of the period. By the way, we collected these memes between January and May 2020. So that's when the data comes from. Then we move on to the second study. So here we try to unpack the stories being told within the memes. And it's kind of hard to unpack stories because memes often offer just a glimpse of a situation or a comment, but some of them actually do have a very narrative structure. So in order to look at that, we propose this framework that builds on other typologies of roles, the victim, the persecutor, the hero, and the fool. So basically these are prominent roles within the meme, and the way in which people or groups are depicted as either one or the other, and the relations established between them are quite interesting to unpack the political narratives of memes. So one of the dominant storylines, you know, the way these roles connected to each other, of course, had to do with Donald Trump. A lot of these communities on Reddit, you know, they are American, they come from the US. Donald Trump and the US government or different US agencies were very often depicted as persecutors of US citizens who are the victims, but also as fools. So persecutor and fool were these double roles attributed to Trump and different agencies. The president of China and China itself were depicted often in the second storyline as persecutors, but both of their own people, but also of people from other countries. So that was a difference with the US scenarios. And we all kind of, for some memes, we were all victims of that. But interestingly, it was quite rare to have President Xi being depicted as a fool. It was mostly as a persecutor alone, so in contrast with Donald Trump. Then we have North Korea. You know, it was a small but quite consistent set of memes depicting Kim Jong-un as a persecutor, not of everyone and, you know, everyone on the globe, but especially North Korean ill people. There were a lot of memes around how North Korea has 0 people infected because every time they find one, basically the person is eliminated. So and then we have other world governments being represented, UK, Australia, mostly as persecutors of their own citizens, with a notable exception of New Zealand, who of course did well in reality, at least with the first wave. What's interesting, so all of these narrative templates are quite common, and they talk about protest, isn't it? You protest the government, you protest measures, and usually it's the unfair actions of a government that are being protested. This is the typical narrative of protest. But here, actually, it's an interesting reversal, because what people were protesting was not governments reducing freedoms. It was governments not acting fast enough to reduce some freedoms so that we would see the end of the pandemic. So it was an interesting kind of unique aspect to this particular crisis. And what else was unique was that, as I mentioned before, there were different in-groups and out-groups being constituted. One of the biggest ones came from the people who help us, you know, the heroes, medical workers, essential workers. And on the other hand, you have all these people who don't respect measures, protest measures, spread conspiracy theories, who are persecutors and or fools. So that was the last scenario we found. So just a few examples here. So you see Trump in the middle on the left side. It's a hoax. All the other countries are preparing, you know, having medical equipment and believing in the pandemic, and Trump not. Here, a double role of persecutor and fool. Then you have Kim Jong-un. When tourists spread virus, you realize that the most dangerous place on Earth became the safest place on Earth. So this was an interesting twist to that narrative of North Korea as a persecutor. Of course, it persecutes its own people, but in a reversal within the pandemic, it's almost a heroic act not to let anyone in. So I put it here just to show that these big narratives had many small variations that, of course, I can't, you know, account for right now, but I can definitely talk to you later about them. The medical workers one is, I'm sorry, do you accept claps? So so here you have, they are heroes, but they're also victims of governments and the system who is clapping for them, or all clapping, you know, for them, but are we paying them correctly, you know, for the work they do? So that was the critique there. And China, you can't defeat me. Hong Kong, I know who can. And that's the coronavirus. So this is from which movie is this? The Ragnarok type of movie, yeah, with Thor. And here you have this quite a story-like kind of thing, where China is the persecutor, but from a Hong Kong perspective, interestingly, the virus becomes a hero. You know, the virus is, by persecuting China, it becomes a bit of a hero, at least in the context of this meme. So a few last words about which memes are creative. So as I mentioned, part of the sample was coded by multiple coders for different criteria: overall creativity, a level of elaboration, so how well made and crafty it was, humor, which is again a criteria we included because of this particular domain, meaningfulness, you know, does it make sense? Is it meaningful? you know, can we understand it? And surprise, which was grouping a bit the element of originality, novelty, you know, is it new, is it surprising? And what we found, perhaps unsurprisingly, if you look at research, is that surprise and meaningfulness, all of these correlated, but surprising meaningfulness correlated the least, which comes to show that there is always a bit of a trade-off between how original and out there you are and how meaningful your message is. But what is very interesting for us is that actually, in this context at least, overall creativity correlated highly with elaboration. So it was a matter of making a meme that is crafty and well made, that really won the day. It's a criteria we don't often talk about much when we score our creativity tests or you know, divergent thinking tasks. And then humor correlated highly, because I think that's quite a domain specific element here. Last slide, just one idea is to say that by looking at what makes a meme creative, we came up with these different processes that make a meme creative. So one of them is familiarizing the new and giving it a concrete way in which we can understand it. If you see that guy, the coronavirus impersonator, looking at a face mask, it's as if you're looking at a little fence that protects nothing. So that's a way of familiarizing a process, a medical process we don't usually get or think about, into a very concrete way. And that's one way of being creative. Defamiliarizing is a way of making strange something that was quite conventional, like the Corona beer. There was so much on Corona beer. So here it becomes allied with the virus, of course. So it becomes something strange and new for us to think about it in this way. And refamiliarizing is when you take an existing object and give it a completely new value, and yet you keep it as that object. So here you have toilet paper wrapped in or put in little plastic bags as if it was cocaine. Okay, hit me up if you need toilet paper. So here you keep the meaning of what toilet paper is, but it also becomes something like a valuable commodity. It becomes almost like a drug. And it's very interesting to have this white thing in a bag, you know, that really reminds us of that. So to conclude, we've all been online, perhaps much more now with confinement. And in these spaces, when you talk about online participation, I think it's fundamental that we think about creativity and learning at the same time. But what we learn and create varies, of course, online, from new hobbies and fun kind of tricks to conspiracy theories. So one conclusion for us is that we need much more research into both these darker sides and the brighter sides of creative learning online. And I want to thank you and leave you with this meme. If this COVID situation has taught me anything, is that if the end ever does come, we're all just going to keep memeing about it until it takes us. And I think some people would do that. Excellent. So I know I kind of went over time, so I don't know if we have time for questions, but if there is any kind of question, any comment, any quick questions or on comment, be happy to. Let me see if the chat is also. Anyone? It's all clear? I do recommend going online and seeing what happens now with the coronavirus memes Reddit forum, because one of the things that really intrigues me and my collaborators is how dynamic this type of data really is. It really follows current situations, and I think what we would find today there would be quite different in terms of all of these processes than what we analyzed. So this is research that needs, you know, it's kind of this temporality and urgency to it. So thank you very much. I'm gonna, in the interest of time, move on, and then maybe we come back to some of these ideas in the final discussion. And I think I should maybe stop sharing the screen and invite Giovanni, right, to talk to us. Sorry, it's a little technical. Yeah, here we go. So Giovanni Corazza from University of Bologna. To talk to us about creativity and learning in 2020, celebrating 150 years of Maria Montessori. Giovanni, if you want to share or just talk to us.
Okay, I'm sharing. I don't know if you see the slides. Do you see my slides?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so thanks a lot. I'm very happy to close this morning, which was very, very interesting, and heard excellent presentations, and I would really like to hang on my messages to the previous presentations. I'll be able to say something not everything that I would want to, but anyway, let's move on to, we've been talking about the future, but let's move to the past, the 19th century, back in Italy, in Chiaravalle, in the province of Ancona. It's a small town, not far from the sea. And of course, the society back then was very different from what we have today. And as you see, even in this old card, not too many women around, because women were supposed to stay at home and the men were around doing the work. This is the times where Maria Montessori was born, 1870, August 31st. So it's 150 years since she was born in Chiaravalle. And from the start, she was not at ease at all with what was expected from her, from society, and in their family too. So she had to fight a lot with her father to pursue scientific studies, but she was also supported by her mother in that. And she managed to get a degree in medicine, only the third woman to get a degree in medicine in Italy, and the first one to major in neuropsychiatry. And she worked as a neuropsychiatrist for a few years, but very soon she got interested in poor children. She was working in Rome, and poor children back then were not going to school at all. They were abused and very soon closed into mental hospitals because they were thought to be crazy, essentially. And she started to open up a place for them to be educated. It was called the Home of Children, La Casa dei Bambini. And this is the place where she developed her methods and also her theory, because we will be talking more about the thought of Maria Montessori more than the methodology, because if you read what she wrote back then, you will understand that she was really a genius, and which goes very far beyond the Montessori method. But in any case, she developed this methodology with this children that everybody thought they were just impossible to be educated. And she brought many of them to pass the final exam at the primary school, something that was deemed to be impossible by doctors and teachers of the time. And what she had shown is that what these little children needed was education and not cure. So let me stop for a second the narration about Maria. I will come back to that, to talk about education in general. And what we've heard this morning is, especially from Maciej, is that there is a very, very intricate relationship between intelligence and creativity, and on the development of intelligence and creativity. Of course, the school and the education system in general should be concerned with developing both, but traditional methods are more geared towards intelligence than creativity, and traditional tests are more geared towards testing intelligence skills than creativity. So what I want to do is, first of all, reflect for a second about the intelligence of the definition of these two constructs. And this is what we proposed in a recent submission with Todd. And you will see that the definitions are similar but different. And it's important to look at what is similar between intelligence and creativity and what is different. First of all, intelligence requires goal direction. So you need to have clear goals in order to be intelligent. And you need to achieve the goals in a very effective way, brilliant way, fast and rapid thinking. If you achieve your goals, which are sound and approved by society in a very brilliant way, people will say that you are intelligent. Now, this will all depend on the context. The context will determine the goals and will determine the way in which people say that you achieve the goals in an effective way. Let's look at the definition of creativity. First of all, we still have effectiveness. And we have no explicit mention of the goals, which does not mean that you don't have goals, but they are not necessarily defined a priori. So you could find goals a posteriori as you're exploring a domain of knowledge. and find a posteriori that you find something that you were not really looking for, because there is a possibility for serendipity. But of course, if you're doing problem solving in a creative way, you do have goals that are set out a priori, and you still have effectiveness. So there is a clear overlap between the skills that are needed for intelligent behavior and the skills that are needed, for example, for creative problem solving. Also, you need originality, or in a potential way, and I will come to the potential right away. In order to be creative, you need originality, which means three things. You need novelty, you need surprise, as we've seen in Vlad's talk, and you need authenticity. And this is not necessary for intelligence. So you can be intelligent without being original. But of course, it is not impossible to be intelligent and original in your response. So again, there is some room for overlap and some room for distinction between the two constructs. And one thing which is present in the definition of creativity, which is absent in that of intelligence, is potential. So potential means that when you are being creative, not necessarily you will achieve originality and effectiveness, but in order to be very creative, you need to have a high potential for that, which means that you're challenging the state of the art. You're going out of conventional ways of thinking. So when you go out and you start exploring, you have the potential to find something which has value in terms of originality and effectiveness, but it's not necessary that you will find it. So you have no guarantee a priori, and the value of the products or ideas, tangible or intangible products that you find, will be assessed or estimated a posteriori. So as you see, the two constructs have many things in common and some important fundamental differences. They both are context embedded. So the question is, perhaps in order to understand and distinguish between the two constructs, we should use the context. So how can we use the context? How can we classify the context? And what we propose is to use two dimensions. The first one is time, the time that you have available for your exercise, for your thinking exercise, for your activity to reach your goals. And that time that you have can be very tight, which means that you have very tight schedules. And if you miss the deadline, you get punished, or very loose, which means that it can happen this year, maybe next year, nobody's really looking at you. So you have a loose time structure. And the other dimension is conceptual space, the semantic space in which you're looking for a response. You're looking for a solution. So that space can also be very tight. For example, when you're considering a problem where there's a single answer, which is the correct answer, or it can be very loose in all those cases in which you are free to explore and nobody really knows if there is an answer, and there are possibly thousands of different possible solutions or answers or ideas, and nobody can say a priori which one is better than the other. So when you cross these two dimensions, you get four quadrants. The first one up here, which is tight space, let's say single correct solution in a tight time. And this is where intelligence dominates, to provide correct, brilliant, fast answers. I go to the right here, you have loose space. So you're opening up the structure in the conceptual space. You open up the possibility for alternatives, but still you want them very fast. Brilliant, creative, divergent thinking here. On the left side, we have tight space, so single solution again, if you want to think in a simple way, but loose time, very complex problems, problems at which people think about for months or maybe years. And finally, down here, you have loose space and loose time. And here you're free to wander in spaces, conceptual spaces where nobody else has been before, for an amount of time which is undetermined, undefined a priori. Now, we really, in education, but also in life,
we really have the possibility to visit all the 4 quadrants, even though we spend most of our lives up here. And it's interesting to see that Einstein had something to say for each of these 4 quadrants. So I'll start up here. When space is tight and time is tight, you need to learn the rules of the game, and you need to play better than anyone else. You need to be fast and brilliant. I go here. So the space is tight. Perhaps you're thinking about relativity. The time is loose. And Einstein says, it's not that I'm so smart, but I stay with problems longer than other people. I allow myself to stay for a long time on a problem. I go to the right here. So we open up the space in a tight time. So we are working with divergent thinking, looking for fast alternatives. Creativity is intelligence having fun. So opening up space for alternatives allows humor, allows playing games. And so your intelligence is now having fun. But now look at the 4th quadrant down here, the loose quadrant. Everything that is really meaningful, inspiring, has been created by those people who can labor in freedom. The importance of freedom, the importance of being able to work for undetermined time, exploring free spaces. Now, what does this have to do with Maria Montessori? I will show you that ideas from Maria Montessori can be mapped onto each one of these 4 quadrants. And I will mention 5 different contributions. First one, Maria Montessori writes, essentially 1900, the year is 1900, that the child is not an empty vase to be filled by teachers. The child is already a complete being with a latent potential. So the purpose of education and the purpose of a good teacher is to let this potential grow. Now, if you repress your creative potential, of course, you will not be able to show that kind of behavior anymore. And she also says that the individual differences in the adult life depend on early experiences at development in the 3 to 6 years of age. So by saying that, what she is anticipating in the 1900 is what we know today about synaptogenesis, the fact that we have the largest number of synapses at 2 years old, and the rest of development is really pruning those synapses to form our brain and our cognitive capacities and our emotional capacities in a biocultural way, which depends on genetics, but depends very, very importantly on our experiences. The second message from Maria Montessori is that you know about freedom in education. This is one of the mantra for Montessori schools, but freedom does not mean confusion. It does not mean chaos. So freedom means that a child can choose what to work on, what to focus on, where to place the attention. And when you're free to choose and you become interested in something, that leads to very deep focus and concentration. And so the target for a Montessori teacher is to have these children that choose what to work on for the day, get concentrated and get silent, but not because they are scared of somebody or they have been threatened not to talk, but because they are immersed in flow. So Maria Montessori, with their methodology, anticipates the modern studies on flow. And she always writes, discipline comes from vocation and not imposition. Number 3, if you've seen the methods of Maria Montessori, you see that many of them involve many senses. So they are multisensorial tools. For example, you learn to write or count using these kind of methods that you touch essentially with a very soft material or leather, these shapes for the letters and the numbers. And by recognizing that sensory motor functions are fundamental for learning, she anticipates embodied cognition essentially. And she writes, the ends are proper tools of intelligence. Intelligence is mediated by the hands. Number 4, one of the most important activities for teachers in Montessori schools is to prepare, design, realize and prepare an environment which is all geared and matched to the capacities and possibilities, the affordances should be matched to the capacities of the children. And in this picture, you can see that. And by doing this, by imagining and then realizing in the Casa dei Bambini, this kind of environment, she anticipates embedded cognition notions, so that thinking is heavily influenced by the environment. The final one is cosmic education. What she writes is that we should give to childhood a vision of the entire universe, a cosmological vision, which means that you don't need to give all the details, of course, of chemistry, physics, mathematics, or arts to the children, but you have to sow the sciences. So put those little ingredients that will allow a child to become very passionate when he or she is adult. Finally, I want to say that in 1929, she founded the Association Montessori Internationale in Amsterdam. And the first members of this association were Freud, Piaget, Edison, and Marconi, among others. So how can we map some of these ideas from Maria Montessori on the space-time continuum, as we call these 4 quadrants? Well, first of all, you need to start with freedom. You need to allow space and time to choose. And when you choose, you have a long time to work on possible ways to find solutions that really will form part of your competence. And once you have found your interest and your passion, then now it's time to focus so that you can develop capacity to work in a tight time and tight space, but the tightness has not been imposed by external elements, but it comes from you. And now that you have mastered the discipline, now you can have fun. You can find alternatives and you can let the flow and improvise in music, in math, or whatever you are interested in. So you can work in this quadrant once you have mastered through this circle that I've shown you, the knowledge that you need and the capacity to improvise on the discipline that you're interested in. So I thank you very much. I think I also went over a little bit with the time, and I'm really interested in questions if there's any.
It was you were managing tight time, Giovanni. Excellent. Thank you so much. And what an enlightening presentation, kind of putting together all the dots. I like how you came back to Maria Montessori as well. So any questions for Giovanni? We have just a little bit of time, but any curiosities or reflections? Monitoring the chat as well. Where can we read about this this model, Giovanni, and what you work with Todd?
So there is a first version which has been published on Frontiers in Psychology, on the paper that is entitled The Big Bang of Originality and Effectiveness.
Right.
Which you are an open reviewer of that, so I can say that you reviewed it. So
I was trying to pitch
that.
it.
You have seen that, but this new version, it's submitted now to the Journal of Intelligence. So we're waiting for a response on that.
I'm not a reviewer there.
No, you're not a reviewer there,
but it's good to know that it's an open source, right? With Frontiers, the first paper.
Yeah, and the Journal of Intelligence is also open source, so hopefully it will come out there. Yeah.
Excellent. Any comments, or we move to the general discussion? Anyone? Thank you so much, Giovanni. Let me give you that round of applause here. Here we go.
Thank you.
I hope you hear it or felt it. And Claude, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
Excellent. So my colleague Claude will be the master of ceremony for 20 minutes or so, trying to make sense and wrap up all of this. Claude, I
Yeah,
leave the
that's a huge responsibility, but anyway. So yeah, it's not easy to really make a synthesis of that morning. I mean, we spanned across several topics, several domains and everything. And I think that if I had to find a red line between all of that, I would say that, well, it may be just a common word saying, but the world has changed radically, and that, you know, new challenges have arisen on health, education, politics, economy, and everything. And a huge change that we've witnessed over the past decades is our much wider use of technology. So we now have these machines which make us able to, I mean, we have the robots, the artificial intelligence, the data processing and everything, and we are able to process data better than before, which brings us new knowledge, fosters innovation. It helps us understand better a huge number of things, including our capacity to learn and create. And we also communicate a lot more, way more. It means that people are more aware of the social challenges. They exchange a lot, okay? And this could also create some solution. You know, I've seen in the chat that somebody mentioned circular economy, for example, which is something that's a bit more new, coming from the will of people, basically. We see more and more the will of people coming in the discussion with good or bad reasons, but yeah. So on the other hand, I mean, when we look at the picture, we also hear a lot that it, you know, all this communication and everything reinforces people in their convictions, you know, the echo chambers and everything. And sometimes we may get the impression also that it hinders intelligence and critical thinking. You know, you're part of a group, you're supposed to think like that group and everything. So I even had a little meme prepared for that as a meme. As a something for Vlad, you know. You remember before the internet that it was so that the cause of collective stupidity was the lack of access to information. Well, it wasn't that. So it was just to poke a little bit at your talk on memes. Okay. So to finish on that, I'd like to have the opinions of our different speakers on whether our era is more informed, more educated, and more creative that it has been in the past, okay? Or on the opposite, if we stick more to predefined models in economy, opinions, and everything, which are more, I mean, people get convinced of that by some kind of, you know, collective inertia or something like that. So do you have any, and it's true, it can be true for anything. Economy is an example. It's the one that we see a lot in politics and everything, but we can also think about this in education. I mean, so who would like to start the?
Well, I can start since I was the last to speak. First of all, I think there is much more information now, which is not knowledge necessarily. So this is the age of information. And for the first time in history, we have the problem of filtering information instead of possessing information. And our mind is extended by technology. So the information that we receive is mediated by information and communication technologies, which also poses some threats, because those who control the technology can also control the information that arrive at most of the people. For example, through search engines and various mechanisms that semantic or non-semantic mechanisms that drive the response from search engines. From that point of view, we need to think of and this goes in line with what Todd was talking about, I think, we need to think of the ensemble of the human and this kind of technology, which is not necessarily a robot. So we can have different forms of aid from technology, and the smartphone, of course, is the first example that comes to mind, which is a part of our body right now. So we need to think of this ensemble and understand how we can develop the sensitivity and the vision of the human part, the ability to give meaning. We've been talking about that because meaning will reside on the human side. And this is the kind of a problem that we have now in designing school systems and education systems for the future. The ensemble of the human and the machine. I think that is the challenge.
Thank you. Anybody else would like to add something?
Hello?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, hello.
Yes, I could reply to your question too, if you hear me. Okay, I think that the answer to that question is technology and internet and all, is it enhancing or diminishing human creativity, creative thinking, critical thinking and all? I think it is, for some people, enhancing, for some people diminishing, and for those in the middle, it's both enhancing and diminishing. And the issue is what's the percentage of the population who's in these three categories? Because I think that there is a shifting, as there's too much out there, people have to limit what they look into. And so I think there's a global shifting of the population towards the lower category, which is that they just simplify and listen to the info that fits with what they already know. So that category is getting bigger in population, but there is a category that is benefiting from all this rich internet and technology environment, which is the other end. And in the middle, where you might find most people, in fact, they are perhaps being pushed towards one end or the other. So it's like the income gap. It might get bigger and bigger as technology goes on and on.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
Well, I have a few thoughts as well. I mean, I don't know if you opened a very, very nice wide question, so I'm going to answer very specifically in terms of social media. But before I do that, I was thinking now about how we sometimes fall to prey to the danger of presentism, in a way of interpreting other times through the lenses of today. And of course, we're talking about stuff here, the games and the social media. This did not exist before. But I did collaborate with some historians, by the way, a long time ago. And what they made me acutely aware of is that the way we think of contemporaneity and modernity, you know, people who we think were pre-modern were actually doing many of the things we are doing today, just in a different way. So there is always a risk of assuming that we do something completely different. But at the same time, of course, if I look at social media and from a sociocultural perspective, I can see the same, like the process I talked about, defamiliarize, familiarize. These are as old as the human species, and then probably even beyond that, I think Giovanni would say, especially. But they get accelerated now because the whole aim of a meme is to be creative in this little c way. That is the nature of memes, and that's partially why they're successful in some ways. So I feel like there is a lot of, we should distinguish process, product, and content, and then context, and also content, perhaps, now that I misspoke, and kind of see things in this more dynamic way, where if one of the things is new, the other ones might be a bit old or familiar. And I think it's in this space where we have either more radical or more close to the usual type of I'm not of the opinion that necessarily the internet, social media increase or decrease creativity or innovation. I agree with Todd that the effect varies, but I think it varies for the same person depending on task and moment and what you do. Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Can I just say, can I respond?
Yeah, sure.
I'm continually amazed about the lack of the education system and our sense of what is education about the ignorance, the lag, and the lack of sensitivity to the value of creativity and to the changing world due to the technology. I mean, Giovanni just reminded us that Montessori was born 150 years ago, so that we had really important voices that we recognize today discussing the value of creativity in the field of education. How do you enable? How do you inspire? How do you allow? How do you generate creativity in young people, but also in society. And we have 150 years later, and the world has changed because of technology. And still, I think the only institution and the only infrastructure that resists in such a way is education. I can't think of anything else. If it's me, then please add something onto it. But I think it's the only place in human human infrastructure, human social care, human democracy, sense of proliferation, and allowing and providing all this wealth to the individual and to societies. Education is the only one who seems to be stuck in the mud and really not wanting to allow. And it's not just the technology. It's not that the education cannot enhance, cannot change, cannot open up because of the technology, because creativity and the value of creativity was there long before the technology. So what is it that makes educational systems and educational mindsets resist so much and not take the risk of doing something different to help young generations for society and a life that we know nothing about? I mean, why do we feel that at least we are safe and we have a baseline if we continue doing the same thing that was originated in the late 18th century, we continue doing it now, where everything has changed?
Do you feel that it's just education that's static? Because when I look, I mean, I'm a computer scientist, so my vision of social sciences in general is probably a lot biased than the one of a layman. But when I look at economy, for example, it seems also full of dogma. Even if the research says that we should go another direction, there's still that kind of the inertia also there. And when I look also at the way that management is done in companies and everything, everybody talks in the literature about collaborative management and everything. But on the other hand, we have still a huge number of people who are very hierarchical management strategies. And there's probably some other examples like that. So I kind of have the impression that it's the human nature to move a little step by little step, and one step forward, one step backwards. And I don't know if it's specific to education.
Yeah, maybe it's not specific to education, but there are specific aspects of education that cause this. And this is it's an open question to see ways in which we can enable education to change, and to see more and more examples of different kinds of education being implemented. You know, I don't really much know about finance or about management or the corporate sector, but and I don't know what kind of changes have been effected there and what kind of resistances there are. But in education, there seems to be only resistance. I don't see many changes. I mean, do you see any change in the math curriculum in the last 150 years? There's not that much. It's just a dumbed down version of tertiary mathematics, which is the same because mathematics is a science of 2,500 years. I mean, how fast can it progress for it to come down to university life and then to come down to primary education life? It just doesn't happen. So I'm just raising a concern about one field and not saying that there isn't any other field that suffers from this.
If I can also react to this, to what Claude was saying, there is inertia in many, many sectors. Of course, education is a critical one, I agree. But the most critical one, I think, is energy. I mean, we keep using the energy systems that we know are destroying the earth. And if we don't see that, and if we're not able to change that, this means that inertia in the human species is really very, very strong. And of course, it's all driven again by economic interest, because the fact that we are still using carbon, coal, oil, it depends on the vested interest in those energy sources, but we really need to start changing.
But also, aren't we also now talking about innovation drivers, so to say? Because I have been seeing, you know, due to COVID and at the University of Bergen, that then people didn't have any choice. Everything went online, so the teachers and everyone had to learn how to use different technology and digital tools, and it would have taken many, many years, in fact, to get the same sort of innovation, or I'm not sure innovation necessarily has happened, but at least people seem to have started to use different kinds of digital tools that they didn't know about from before, and they had changed their practices. And it doesn't seem to be, many has had a lot of, worries about how to use this sort of technology. And now people had to just get into the water and swim. But of course, there is the chance that there will be an even bigger digital gap, or what we can say, because the people that are actually coping, they do well, and then there will be a large gap, or at least this is how it seems.
So Ingunn, you're saying we need to be forced so that we can change.
we need a crisis. No, but now I think it's yeah, in a way we need to be forced, but we also need to be aware of it, I think, but then again, do we need to be forced all the time, or will there be times to reflect as well? I mean, it's like now I think we have been moving fast forward, so maybe we should stop and reflect a little bit on how to use the technology. What do we want? How can we use this technology in the best way, and not just, I don't know, we have to have in education, we need to have like a pedagogical, framework and didactical choices, and yeah.
Maybe
agree,
that can be the topic of the meeting in Bergen in December. Yeah. Now that you're putting it out loud, it's about the pedagogies and the principles that can drive us.
What is education? What is the aim of education? How can technology help us achieve that?
Right.
Yeah, but for that, there's probably as many answers as people, because if you think of the aim of education, not education, but the education system, we can see the big objective, the nice objective of raising knowledge and critical thinking and intelligence, but also on serving the economy, having a meaningful and a purposeful job and skills for being a part of the economy. So there's probably a lot of answers to that. But what I see from the different things that we have also a lot of discussions about something, I mean, can be called ethics, trust, or something like that. I mean, that kind of, transversal consideration, objective, or whatever. So do you think there is, do you think there is creativity or innovation into that field? I mean, I don't know if that's clear enough, but you see, there's a lot of things about the energy, the use of energy, the purpose of education, the economy, the everything that has to do with ethics somehow. I mean, we need somebody to oversee, I mean, somebody, some philosophy to oversee everything. And do you think that this has changed over the past years? I mean, is there any creativity in that, or are we stuck in the same principle that we used to have in human principle that we used to have in maybe since the beginning of humanity? I don't know. That's society. It's a very open question. I know that's.
Well, you said that everyone has an answer to the previous question of their own. Imagine for this one when it comes to ethics and moral. Well, there are colleagues who work, and I know of a few books coming out as well now on ethics and creativity. And usually, what people do is, at least in this area, they consider the uses of creativity that can be more ethical and ethical. They talk about malevolent, benevolent firms, and so on. Yeah. And I think they trace it back to a long time. So it's kind of the emergence of creativity. It always had these two sides to it. But it's an interesting thought to think about what technology does to our understanding of other people. I mean, at the core of ethics is often being able to put yourself in the position of the other, a very Kantian type of imperative to use other people, never to use other people, actually to look at them as goals and not means. And I think with the use of technology, and especially the distanciation between self and other, it might become easier to stereotype or to mob or to bully, because sometimes we miss that more interpersonal connection. And to see the other, Levinas would probably say, to see yourself in the other. So yeah, it's a big question, but that's my philosophical 2 cents there.
So I don't know how much time we have left. It's probably almost over. So does anybody have a question or comment or?
I guess the question is, when do we go for a drink and for dinner after the symposium? Well, we'll have to do it next year, I suppose, where we postpone the drinks and. But I want to thank you very much, Claude, and to thank all the presenters and everyone who attended. It was really a wonderful event. It was a short one. We were tight on time, again, referring back to Giovanni's schema. But hopefully we had a lot of intelligent and creative arguments coming through. And I think the aim of this was to update each other on what we're doing now, so that this becomes a resource for the next event and a kind of a little pin on the map of how the field through us and with us and with other colleagues is moving. And I think, Ingunn, what you mentioned about pedagogy and the philosophy of education and what it really means to incorporate technology and what we can practically do, I think that would be a wonderful thing to discuss maybe in Bergen.
But next December.
Next December, yeah. Please let the earth be still there, and and an effective vaccine on the way. But I want to thank all of you again. And this has been recorded. I would love to post it, perhaps, to make it available. But if you would like your part to be edited or not to be included, please drop me an email. And yes, we can make that happen too, because technology, can make anything happen. So thank you all very much. And let's meet again before 3 years with maybe another special issue and a book, or just some good practical tools. That would be very good as well. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Great meeting.